Not a haunted house, but a haunted spaceship. Booga 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 booga. Nightflyers, Season 1, Episode 1. Review, right now. Hey y'all, it's your Twisted Girl Next Door here, and today I am doing the review of the well-anticipated George R.R. Martin's, you know him from that other show on HBO, Game of Thrones, Nightflyers, which is basically a horror meets space sci-fi odyssey combined together. It's not the first time we've seen it, but I think when it was written, like late 1980s, it was like one of the first of its kind that really tried to meld the horror and the sci-fi. And so SYFY Channel has basically put out a adaptation series of it. I think there was a movie some years ago that most people may or may not remember, and this is the pilot episode of the first season of this series. And so basically what we got in this first episode was an introduction, like most first episodes are, in terms of who some of the main characters are, the atmosphere of the ship, the fact that there's something freaky going on there in various aspects. And overall, what I got from this pilot was there's a lot of tropes when it comes to, like, once again, that's why I said that when this was, because this series is based off of the novella that George R.R. Martin did some years ago. And I think at the time when the novella came out, it was probably very, innovative and whatnot. And I think this series, at least in this first episode, really stayed true to that. But the problem with staying true to something that came out decades ago and putting it out in 2018 and not seemingly, really changing up the tropes and the character cutouts and whatnot, it can feel a bit dated. Or more so if you're used to this genre, if you've seen the sci-fi genre enough time, or even the horror genre, it can seem like, oh, I know this character. Oh, I know where this is going a little bit. And I'm hoping that maybe that was just for the pilot, like the first episode, like they were trying to like ease you in with the nostalgia of the sci-fi vibe with the horror. So, yeah. So overall, I wasn't super impressed. Okay, so what happened this episode? We met our main characters. The beginning of the episode started with what seemingly makes it seem like everyone we meet after that first scene is probably dead. Yay! Or not. It was a really weird opening. Our character who we eventually get to know is named Dr. Matheson, and the other character that we eventually get to know, Rowan, were kind of facing off. Rowan seemed to have gone crazy. Matheson was putting out some type of distress signal to Earth, possibly telling people, this is not a distress signal, it's a warning, don't come to the Nightflyer or whatever. And then she kills herself, seemingly kills herself, right? Like slits her throat. Whoa. Fast forward or flash back to Dr. Carl Brían, who we meet, and we find out that basically Earth is, like most of these shows do, something's wrong, right? People are dying, there's some type of plague or whatever like that, and Dr. Carl Brían is basically a scientist looking for a cure of some sort. And so he tells his wife that he is going on the Nightflyer to try to make first contact with these alien people named the Vulcan. So the main thing of this pilot episode was clearly to kind of introduce the mission, set up the atmosphere, set up the world of what we're dealing with these characters and kind of the rules of the universe. It was kind of setting the guidelines, such as the L1s are this like next step evolution of humans in the sense of them being able to tell the, visions and read people's minds and project things very very something. And I guess they've dealt with a lot of discrimination, these L1s, because a lot of them are like kept in containment and, you know, feared and whatnot. So Thal basically really has a chip on his shoulder. So the thing about these characters, like I said in the beginning, I think at the time when they were created, they were probably very much innovative to a certain degree. And, you know, I guess if you've seen enough sci-fi shows or movies and even, you know, horror things, more so sci-fi in this case, a lot of these characters fit characters we've seen before, I feel like. And that's not a bad thing if you can kind of make them your own and kind of make it so that they stand out in their own unique way. And I'm not so sure the pilot episode did that. Like, for example, we have Carl, who is seemingly the leader. He's very focused on, you know, getting the mission. You know, we find out that he's got some, you know, there's something that occurred with his daughter who we saw in the beginning of the episode, and we kind of find out that, you know, something isn't really, you know, it's not exactly a happy memory. And of course, he kind of has marital problems and things like that. They kind of fall into that trope too, but he's seemingly like this brooding scientist guy who really has a mission and whatnot. So that's fine. That's who he is. Then we have Dr. Matheson, who is this, you know, upright doctor. It's very clear that her and Carl have some sort of past relationship. Fine, whatever. Then we have Lumi, who is this meek, sort of shy, awkward engineer of the ship. She basically can connect to the ship telepathically to the technology and like work on the ship through that way and see what's going on with the ship. And, you know, she's fine. I mean, we don't know much about her. We know she's kind of shy. We know that she kind of has a thing for Melantha. I'm going to get her name right. I'm just going to call her Mel. We'll talk about it in a second. So, yeah, she's fine. She's, you know, that shy one who's probably going to come out of her shell as the series goes on, or maybe she has some deep, dark secret. You know, there's more to the surface than her being shy. You can kind of call that from a mile away. Then there's Mel, who I was actually really excited about because, you know, Martin was talking about the fact that when he first wrote this novella, Mel was written as a Black woman, but all the interpretations, surprise, surprise, of her always had her as a white woman in the adaptations and even the book cover and whatnot, that they showed Mel to be a white woman, even though George R. R. Martin wrote her as a Black woman. So this was the first time with this adaptation of this story where Mel is portrayed as a Black woman, which is yay diversity, which is really cool. Now, aside from that coolness, what we know if you read the novella or if you know anything about the novella is that this character Mel is like, you know, very free sexually, and she's kind of the, you know, genetically altered, cool, badass woman, and she's like, you know, seduces and has sex with a lot of the people in the crew and things of that nature. And so you run the risk of, you know, because, you know, now that it's portrayed as a Black woman and there can be a objectification and exploitation of Black women's images as just sexual objects and whatnot, that there's a fine line, right? So you kind of hope that in this series that, of course, I'm fine with her still being sexual. I'm fine with her still being sensual because, yay, that's great. And the actress who plays her is gorgeous. But at the same time, making it so that there's more to her than being the eye candy of the show and that tough girl trope that sometimes happens. And so I'm hoping for that. I didn't get a sense of that in this first episode, but once again, it's the first episode. You can't get to know everyone's backstory in the very beginning. All we get is the fact that her and Lumi basically hook up, which is fine. Then there's Rowan, the biologist. He seems cool. He's kind of, you know, the sarcastic professor type scientist who's skeptical and doesn't play with the other kids type of deal. We've seen this character before too. Once again, not a bad thing. That character is actually needed on shows like this sometimes, because you need that character that's going to kind of point the obvious out, that's going to be the one who probably, you know, is very direct and upfront about a lot of the things that are going on. And so that's fine. And that's basically the role Rowan plays. Then there's Thal. Thal is kind of the quintessential young guy who's annoying and has a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. Also probably has a thing for Matheson, fine, whatever. Or maybe that's her kid. I don't know. I mean, I don't like kids in horror pictures. These characters, sometimes the young person, because they're made to be so naive and so brash and whatnot, they're made to be the ones that get into trouble so that the plot moves along, and sometimes it can feel contrived, and they sort of fell into that in this first episode with him all of a sudden just not being trusted and having a chip on his shoulder and causing problems because he was just really hostile towards the crew members. And then he gets out and it's a whole thing, and it's just like, why? You know, it was like, okay, stuff is happening, it's cool, so this whole episode isn't just really slow, because it had a really great opening, and then after that it is kind of paced along. And so yeah, with him stuff started happening, but then you're kind of like, you stop and you're like, okay, but why is this stuff happening? Then we have Captain Eris. Yeah, he's a hologram so far. He's a hologram. In this first episode, he basically, very mysterious. We don't know why he's a hologram. Is he really on the ship? You don't know. Him and Mel also seem to have sort of a thing. Don't know where that came from. I guess it was an initial kind of flirtation type thing, because he's watching everyone through the cameras and he watches her too. So I guess we'll get to know him more. He's probably the one character who's not a trope so far, because he's such a mystery. You know, I think Carl character would probably usually be the captain of a ship, right? So in this sense, there's already a captain. Carl is the lead, though, of the crew that's on this ship, with the other crew of Eris's crew. And so Eris is probably kind of that dark horse where it's like, I don't know what trope he fits into yet. And then, we had the kind of like I was just talking about, the semi-romances. I don't care for them at this moment. I see it from a mile away that Carl and Matheson have this sort of thing going on, this past that they're most likely going to explore, but I don't care if they explore it so far, because I got nothing in terms of chemistry from these two. But obviously there's something going on, but he's still married at this moment, so I don't know what's that about. So that's pretty clear. Like I said, Mel and Lumi kind of hooked up, and then you have Mel and Eris have this kind of flirtation going on. Maybe I'll care a bit more for the romance. And that's very hard for me to say, because I tend to love romance in genre, right? I love if a horror movie or a horror show has a romantic subplot, because I think that adds heart to the show. The relationships sometimes raise the stakes when it's done right, though. And when it's not done right, it feels like a distraction from the plot you want to be paying attention to. So right now, these interpersonal relationships they're kind of hinting at feel a little bit tacked on more than necessary. So yeah, overall it's kind of spooky. There's some weird stuff with whether it's the ship or Thal who's doing it to people when it comes to playing with their mind and these weird hallucinations that people are happening to them and whatnot. So that it kind of has an atmosphere. This is the first episode, so I don't really feel like it's found its pacing yet. I do have my one drawback so far is I don't have anyone to root for. Even though we got an introduction to all of these characters, I kind of didn't feel like anyone was like, yeah, this I'm really gonna like this character. I didn't feel that way with anybody, and I wanted to feel that way with Mel, because all the media was around this idea of Mel finally being represented as a Black woman, and she's so cool and badass, and you only got kind of glimpses of her, and then this thing with Eris, and then her hooking up with Lumi, so she's kind of just doing the sexual thing right now, and I don't know where she stands as her own character just yet. So yeah, And so I don't really have anyone to root for, anyone I really like. And so I wanted to do sort of a thing where I do like breakout performance. And I'm going to go with the guy who got burned at the end of the episode. I think I also remember him from like a Disney movie. So that stood out to me. So that can probably kind of tell you the level of how impressed I was that the guy who names character's name escapes me, that I was like, yeah, that's a breakout performance of this episode. Usually with series, either the pilot episode is like so great, and then sometimes the show goes downhill from there, or sometimes it's okay and it gets really, really good from there. And sometimes you get a happy medium where it's okay or a good pilot and it stays good, but usually I find it's like those two extremes. So the fact that it starts low means that it's probably going to build up. I think if this show is anything in terms of, what it's based off of, this novella that was very popular, that it has something to work with. And I am interested to see where they're going to go, although there's a lot of tropes. What did you think of the first episode of season 1 of Nightflyers? Let me know. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. And also be sure to subscribe so that you are the first to know when I post my videos of all things horror. Thanks for watching. Let's get creepy together.